My favorite kind. Fantastic. Wow. Music lifts my soul and my heart, my whole being. It lights me up. I'm not ready to open this book yet. There's a couple of books I used. Actually, I was just going through a lot of different things to prepare for today. And my favorite is Home with God by Neil Donald Walsh. It's the final in the series, Conversations with God. And I always find something in this little book. Eat Mangoes Naked by Sark. Finding pleasure everywhere and dancing with the kids. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Day of the Dead and appreciating our ancestors, whether we liked them or we didn't like them. They're why we are here. Their existence ensured our existence. So the Catholic Spaniards came to the New World 500 years ago and discovered that the Aztecs had been celebrating the Day of the Dead for 3,000 years. And they tried, but they could not get that celebration out of the culture. So they took it on themselves. And they made everybody Catholic. I mean, does that have any resonance in the world today? So they changed the dates. It used to be a month-long celebration, imagine. A month-long celebration. They shortened it to 3 days and moved it into one of their own. So All Souls Day, which we're celebrating, follows All Saints Day, which is today, the 1st, follows All Hallows Eve, which was yesterday. And I just love all those pictures and all those decorations because it reminds me how I'm connected with everybody, all the time. I'm not just connecting with them now in these 3 days. I'm always connected for fun or for not fun, but we are always connected. And what I try to do with the knowing that the presence of my parents is still with me, I try to understand that they are happier than they were when they were raising me. They're happier now.
That's clear.
So the Aztecs and the Spanish-speaking people all over the world celebrating Day of the Dead, celebrate it in their churches and celebrate it in their homes. People make altars and decorate them with painted skeletons, photos and flowers, and bring food that was loved by the family members. And they go to cemeteries to clean and decorate the graves. There are no cemetery cleaners in many parts of the world. So the families of the people who have died go to the graveyards to clean and decorate the graves. And it is interesting to note that all indigenous cultures of our planet have holy days to honor the dead in some way. And these festivals are in the fall when the harvesting has been completed and the plants are at the end of their cycle. They believe that that everything has a cycle. Of course, they see the cycles. We see our cycles. We see cycles. And to them, death is returning to a new life. In those times, in those indigenous cultures even today, people are more connected to the earth and the cycles of the earth. And especially, they recognize that human beings have their own cycles. We were reminded of that with the reading today. Our body has its own cycles within its 70 or 80 years. And it wears out. As many of you have noticed. So we know that we've got cycles, and we know that we're not going to, we know we're going to die. But we've managed to create a lot of fear around the idea of death. And so I want to talk about that fear just a little. And tell you a few little stories that I have of examining my own fear and experiencing what I experienced. But imagine if we were to remember that death is in fact a part of life. And we have to die to everything. We have to let go to everything. And perhaps if we were able to fear death less, we would also fear life less. So as we understand that it's all part of one cycle of birth, of death, of resurrection, our teachers tell us the best way to deal with our fears of death is by being present with every emotion we have, and do not hesitate to explore your fear of death, or whatever way you are denying death in your own life. So a few weeks ago, maybe it was a few months ago, I tried an experiment of imagining that I was dying. And I urge you to try this because it was a lovely experiment for me. I don't guarantee that every time you experiment with the idea of dying that you will have an equal experience. I decided to lie in my bed and just be aware of my thoughts and aware of what it might feel like to die. See, it's not death that we're afraid of. It's that transition. And it's what comes before. It's the pain that comes before death that we're afraid of. So it helps to explore, to examine, to just imagine. And I have not had any death-defying experiences. I've fallen down a cliff a few times, but nothing that really came close to death. But a lot of people have, and have returned. But in my little meditation experience, I got as quiet as I could with my thoughts and paid attention. And then I felt this great release. And I suddenly deepened my breath and felt this great relief. And so for a while, everything looked really amazing. It's amazing when we come to that place that we imagine might be the bottom, and then look up and we appreciate everything a little bit more. And everything we see contains a lot more light than it ever did before. And we're likely to experience a great deal of peace and joy that eluded us in our egocentric self. So another story I have about death not being what it seems to be. A lot of people think that death is the end, and I know that very few of you do, but it's not always true that we've actually experienced that. And I was called to the bedside of a client's mother who was dying. It would be a few days, or in fact maybe at least a week before she actually died. But I was sitting there with my client and her mother, and Michelle was telling me this story. Her mother was fairly comatose, but the story went like this. A few days before that, Michelle was talking to her mother about dying. And a week or so before that, Michelle's brother had died. He was a drug addict. And he had died. And Michelle had not told her mother because her mother was close to dying as well. So there she was with her mother and talking about her death. And her mother said to Michelle, "Well, you and your brother will take care of everything, won't you?" And Michelle said, "Well, my brother's not here." And she said, and the woman said, "Oh yes, he is. He's right there behind you." And I love that story because it shows us that we, as far as we seem away from that conscious awareness that we're all here together, that nobody in fact has gone anyplace, we are very close to that. We're much closer. We're much closer than we think to having those we love right with us. And they're not going to come to us, so to speak, but we are going to listen for them. We are going to open our hearts for their presence. They're not going to come when we necessarily want them to be there, but to open our hearts and our minds. And there's another story I have of Larry's. I had not been present at the death of either of my parents, which I was regretting, but I was determined to be at the death of Larry's father, which occurred 10, 12, 13 years ago. And he was in assisted living, so he had made many friends with the staff at Sunrise. And they were all gathered around in their sadness. And I was there feeling kind of neutral. And then I started getting happy. I started getting excited. And I was truly unable to share this emotion with the people there because they were so sad. They were so sad, and they would not understand. But it helped me to understand that death is not real. We're making it up. We're making it up because it seems to fit in with what we've come to believe. But the truth, I felt as if I was experiencing the truth of death. And the closer he came to dying, the happier I got. I mean, I really felt the room was full of angels. It was nothing I had ever experienced before. And So it took a while for me to find somebody to talk to about this experience. But it was most interesting. And he died peacefully and beautifully, I might add. Probably you get a chance to see that when we come to die, that we don't have to suffer. And neither does anyone else around us have to suffer. And when we come to experience death with other people, we're suffering because of our attachments, but we're not suffering because that what's happening is real. And of course, some of these things are hard to say because they don't quite fit in with our belief system. So I want to read a few words from Sark. She was at the deathbed of a dear old friend of hers, and she had made several trips to be with Rebecca and listen to her resolve. So these are a few words at the end of the chapter. Those precious moments in her dying company fortified me and convinced me that dying is awesome and ordinary and utterly acceptable. And I'm reading from Thomas More. He wrote a book in '93 called Care of the Soul. It says, at times we must live without answers and be willing to live in the tension of opposites. And I want to finish with a few words from Neil Donald Walsh. The seventh remembrance, there are 18 remembrances in this book. Death does not exist is the seventh remembrance. But I know that you think that it does. And so for you, it absolutely does. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about perceptions and the perspective in which they arrive. This entire conversation is circular. If you haven't already noticed that, you will. This is not a straight line dialogue. We are moving in swirls here, spiraling back to many important points, many times. I want to finish by saying that that I think our greatest gift is our awareness in all of this. That if we can just be aware of what we're thinking and what we're feeling, and offer those feelings to the God of our understanding, offer those feelings to Spirit, and allow them to transform. Allow ourselves to transform our ideas of what we think is true, and especially those ideas about death. And now it's your turn.